Borderlands? I barely know her lands. Ugh. In the late 2000s, the video game world was awash with brown, gritty games. The military shooter boom of the middle of the decade had left consoles and PCs flooded with serious, manly games about war in its varying levels of horror. And whilst many of these titles were very, very good, gamers were crying out for something with a little more pizzazz. Enter Borderlands.
The game was originally set out to be a sort of Halo meets Diablo kind of experience with an aesthetic plucked right from the Fallout franchise. However, when the game was roughly 75% complete, Studio Gearbox altered course due to the fact the muted colour palette clashed with Borderlands' more fantastical content. The Halo meets Diablo type gameplay was retained, but the murky visuals were scrapped in favour of a proprietary style akin to cel shading called inking. Borderlands' art style is not cel shaded, are we clear on that? The 11th hour change was a wise one, as rather than fading into obscurity among the rest of the sludge, Borderlands bounced onto the scene with colourful deeley-boppers and a foul mouth, delighting gamers as it went.
Since its 2009 release, Borderlands has spawned 2 sequels, a pre-sequel, and multiple spin-offs, as well as comics, novels, tabletop games, and even a live-action movie featuring massive Hollywood stars like Cate Blanchett, Kevin Hart, and Jack Black. But of all of the Borderlands video games, which are the jewels of Pandora and which should be left to rot in a vault? This calls for a ranked list, methinks.
I suppose before we get into it though, we better establish the rules. Today we're ranking every Borderlands game from worst to best, including all 3 of the numbered games, plus anything else that got a standalone release under the Borderlands banner. And yes, today we will be including a mobile game. I know, I'm just as distressed about it as you are, but hey, something's got to be at the bottom of the heap, right? We won't, however, be including Loot the World, another mobile offering from the Borderlands franchise, as it was more of a tie-in app rather than a game.
We will also not be including Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, because although it did get a standalone release in 2021, it is ultimately still just DLC for Borderlands 2. But don't worry, we'll look into ranking the various DLCs and playable characters those DLCs brought at some point in the future. Also excluded is Pinball FX Borderlands Vault Hunter Pinball, as whilst it is Borderlands branded, it's not really a proper Borderlands game. I'm told it's not very good though, so it's not like you're missing out.
Our final exclusions for today are the Handsome Collection and the Legendary Collection, on account of the fact they're just bundles of previously released content. And you don't want to hear about the same games twice, do you? Well, at least we assume you don't. In terms of how we're ranking these titles, we've taken a variety of factors into account. How well they did with critics, what the fans thought, the cultural impact they had on the wider gaming landscape, and, for flavour, just a dash of our own personal opinions.
Right, I think that just about covers it all. Let's rank 'em. I'm Vault Hunter Ben.
And I'm a man wearing a mask of his own face over his actual face, Peter from TripleJump, and here is every Borderlands video game ranked from worst to best.
Number 8. Borderlands Legends, 2012. Mobile. There was some debate in the office over which Borderlands game to stick at the very bottom of this list. We were tempted to put our number 7 entry in the spot of shame, and we'll get to why that's so awful in a moment, but in the end we simply couldn't, in good conscience, not put the Borderlands mobile game in last place. Borderlands Legends was released in 2012 for iOS and was an RTS title set on the world of Pandora and starring the Vault Hunters who first appeared in the OG Borderlands: Mordecai, Lilith, Roland, and Brick. Now, I'd love nothing more than to tell you about the story in Borderlands Legends, by the way, but based on all of our research, it would seem that it didn't have one. Oh, I know that the Borderlands series isn't exactly the Leo Tolstoy of video gaming, but I can't help but feel that the devs could have at least made something up to tie everything together a little bit. In each of the randomized and possibly unrelated missions, players dragged all 4 characters around an arena in order to defeat waves of enemies. The Vault Hunters all had their own specialities, so whilst it was a good idea to get the tanky Brick into the thick of the fighting, keeping sniper Mordecai away from the front lines was crucial. As missions were completed, the characters leveled up, and along the way they'd unlock special abilities that used a cooldown system. Now, on paper, all of this sounds great, and perhaps if the mechanics were beefed up a bit and it wasn't on mobile, a real-time strategy Borderlands title would work, but unfortunately, this iOS offering missed the mark by a huge degree. Let's get the good stuff out of the way first, shall we? Most found that controlling the Vault Hunters by dragging them to a desired destination worked rather well and made maneuvering the party a nice, simple task. The art style was also in keeping with the franchise, so it certainly looked the part. There was a good variety of weapons on offer, which again, the series is known for, and players generally liked each Vault Hunter's abilities. Sadly, whilst the game wasn't a complete waste of space, there were a number of things that let it down. Firstly, it lacked any sort of real depth, something which RTS fans have come to expect from the genre, so whilst it was relatively easy to pick up and play, it stuck with the basics and refused to expand upon them. This, coupled with the dull and repetitive missions, meant that players soon became bored with the game. It was also buggy, unimaginative, and severely lacking in the content department, and several outlets came to the conclusion that it was nothing more than a lazy cash grab carelessly thrown together to milk more moolah from the Borderlands teat. Thankfully, no one else will have to be subjected to Borderlands Legends ever again because it was removed from the App Store in 2016, fewer than 4 years after its launch. Thank the maker for that. Number 7. New Tales from the Borderlands, 2022. PS4, PS5, PC, Xbox One and Series, and Switch. As I mentioned, we very nearly put New Tales from the Borderlands in last place because, frankly, it's an insult to the franchise's good name, but it did do slightly better in the review stakes than Borderlands Legends and wasn't a mobile release, so we at least have to give it that, I suppose. New Tales from the Borderlands is a graphic adventure game and the follow-up to Tales from the Borderlands, which we'll be seeing much later on in this video. Whilst the original Tales was developed by the legendary Telltale Games, New Tales has original Borderlands studio Gearbox at the helm. You'd think that no one would know the Borderlands series better than its original creators, but oh, how wrong you'd be. Set around a year after the events of Borderlands 3, New Tales introduces 3 fresh protagonists into the Borderlands soup. Scientist Anu, the fame and fortune-seeking Octavio, and Fran, the owner of a frozen yogurt shop. Yogurt. Fro-yog. Yes. This ragtag group is thrown together by circumstance and finds themselves going up against weapons manufacturer Tediore, who have begun an invasion of the planet Promethea. From a story perspective, it's all very Borderlands. You've got an evil corporation, unlikely heroes, and a likable robot. Those who have played Tales will find that, gameplay-wise at least, New Tales is quite similar to its predecessor. Players must explore their environment, speak to NPCs, complete quick-time events, and make choices that may have an outcome on how the story pans out. I say may, owing to the fact that few of the choices have any real hefty consequences, so rather than life or death decisions, many players felt more like they were at the supermarket trying to choose which drink to have with their meal deal. Always go for the smoothie, worth way more. That's the real middle finger to capitalism. To say that the audience response to New Tales was mixed would be an understatement. The highest review score was a whopping 92 out of 100, whilst the lowest was a dismal 30. Generally though, the game was thought to be a fairly mediocre offering, especially when it was compared to the original. Critics lamented the fact that the gameplay hadn't really evolved in the 8 years since the release of Tales from the Borderlands, and as such, many of the mechanics felt somewhat dated. There was also a great deal of criticism directed at the writing, as many thought that the jokes didn't land and the end product was missing that trademark Borderlands sense of humour. The characters also failed to capture the hearts of players, with several branding them annoying, and there was also little love for the story, which felt generic to some and convoluted to others. The visuals were commended though, and in terms of presentation, New Tales very much fits in with its franchise brethren, but sadly it was all style and no substance that once again felt like nothing more than an exercise in cashing in on the good name of Borderlands. Ah well. Number 6. Borderlands the Pre-Sequel, 2014. PS3, PS4, PC, Xbox 360 and Xbox One, and Switch. You know what I really love? Go on, guess. No? Okay. When developers make up words for things that there are already words for. Prequel was the word you were after, 2K Australia and Gearbox Software. Prequel. What's that? It's called the pre-sequel because it takes place after Borderlands but before Borderlands 2, so it's a sequel to Borderlands but a prequel to its successor. I don't care, it's still silly. The stupidly titled Borderlands the pre-sequel allows players to slip into the shoes, or in the case of one of the protagonists, the wheel of a variety of series mainstays, including Nisha, the sheriff of Lynchwood from Borderlands 2, Wilhelm, one of Jack's enforcers, also from Borderlands 2, Athena, a rogue assassin introduced in Borderlands DLC The Secret Armory of General Knox, and Claptrap, an incredibly irritating little yellow robot who needs no introduction. The story follows the merry band of Vault Hunters along with Handsome Jack, whom players will recognize from Borderlands 2, and sees them attempting to regain control of the Helios space station after it's captured by the Lost Legion, defeat said Lost Legion, and find the hidden vault on Pandoran moon Elpis. In truth, however, what the story really charts is Jack's fall from grace, giving players insight into how he became the megalomaniacal knobber they meet in Borderlands 2. Those acquainted with the series will be familiar with the gameplay in the pre-sequel, as it's classic Borderlands fare. Shoot things, collect guns, repeat, ad infinitum. A couple of new mechanics keep things hot and fresh, however, such as the introduction of laser guns, low-gravity areas in which players can bounce about like a terrifying hybrid of Neil Armstrong and Charlton Heston, and cryogenic elemental effects which freeze enemies and allow players to smash them into tiny pieces Jason X style. Additionally, new vehicles were introduced, including a moon buggy and the Stingray hoverbike. Despite taking the tried and true Borderlands recipe and adding extra goodies, the pre-sequel wasn't as well received as its predecessors. The playable characters got a very warm reception from critics, however, as did the goofy, Aussie-centric humor, the chaotic gunplay and combat, and RPG elements. It wasn't all good news, though. The story was thought weak by some, despite giving some insight into Jack's fall into villainy. The pacing was considered questionable, the level design was confusing in places, and many found the missions to be predictable and lacking in excitement. Overall, the consensus was that the pre-sequel was a reasonable gaming experience for fans of the Borderlands series, just as long as they weren't expecting something groundbreaking. Or should that be face-shattering? Regardless, it does contain the best bit in any Borderlands game. Number 5. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, 2022. PS4, PS5, PC, and Xbox One and Series. One of the finest ideas Gearbox ever had was introducing a D&D-like tabletop game to the world of Borderlands, as we ended up with the incomparable Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep DLC, and the fans went wild for it. It was funny, exciting, and even managed to tug on the heartstrings a little, and players absolutely lapped it up. The only thing that goes against Assault on Dragon Keep is undeniably its length. Being a DLC, it's not as long as the main game, and so players were left clamoring for more from the world of bunkers and badasses. And they got it! In 2022, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands launched on PC and console, transporting players away from the Mad Max-esque world of Pandora and into the imagination of Tiny Tina. In Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, players take on the role of the Newbie, a player-created character who, alongside NPCs Valentine and Fred, voiced by Andy Samberg and Wanda Sykes respectively, is roped into a game of bunkers and badasses run by the eponymous Tina, who is once again voiced by the brilliant Ashley Birch. In the campaign, the Newbie becomes the Fate Maker and is tasked with retrieving the Sword of Souls after the Dragon Lord, who's brought to life by Will Arnett, steals it and decapitates Queen Butt Stallion. That scoundrel! Wonderlands puts a bit of a twist on the standard Borderlands gameplay formula. The looter-shooter and role-playing aspects are still there, but instead of a sci-fi setting, players are treated to a spot of fantasy, meaning the Fate Maker can utilize spells, melee weapons, and armor rather than guns and bombs. Unlike its predecessors, Wonderlands also features an overworld map, which is explored with miniatures, as one would in a real TTRPG, and it's littered with secrets to find, as well as the odd dropped cheese puff and can of spilled drink or two. Prior to the game's release, it seemed like Gearbox had a slam dunk on their hands with Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, but upon its release, it got a relatively tepid response from critics. There was a great deal to love about Wonderlands. The combat was very satisfying, the all-star voice cast put in stellar performances, the humor was arguably better than that found in Borderlands 3, providing you enjoy D&D of course, and the fantasy world looked, well, fantastic. The main criticism leveled at Wonderlands was the fact that it was rather repetitive, with most missions consisting of nothing more than go here, kill bad guys, rinse, repeat. Some were also disappointed by the fact that, despite clearly being inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, the gameplay bore little resemblance to actual TTRPGs. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is not a bad game by any stretch, but unfortunately it did fail to capture the magic of the DLC that inspired it. Not a nat 1, but not a critical success either.
Number 4. Borderlands, 2009. PS3, PS4, PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and Switch. Here it is, the one that started it all. As we mentioned in the intro, things might have been very different for the Borderlands series if developer Gearbox Software had continued on the original course they had planned for the game, and if they had stuck with that stated goal of brown, gritty realism, we might not have had a series at all. Released in 2009 for PS3, PC, and Xbox 360, Borderlands tells the story of a group of vault hunters who make their way to the planet Pandora in search of the fabled vault, which is rumoured not only to contain advanced alien technology, but also riches beyond their wildest dreams. Unsurprisingly, however, they're not the only ones seeking the treasures hiding within the vault, and they find themselves facing off against the Atlas Corporation and their private military in order to prevent them from getting their grubby mitts on the vault's goodies. As though all of that weren't enough, Pandora is also home to a vast array of villains, monsties, and assorted lunatics who, whilst not interested in the vault, are interested in the swift removal of our vault hunters' spleens. Borderlands defined what would go on to become the series' signature core gameplay mechanics, offering players a high-octane, fast-paced shooter experience with role-playing elements and tons of loot generated by the game's procedural loot system. As players make their way through the game, they'll earn experience and level up, and with each new level, they'll gain skill points that can be used to augment their chosen character in a number of ways. Speaking of characters, there are 4 to choose from: Brick the Berserker, Lilith the Siren, Mordecai the Hunter, and Roland the Soldier, and each of these have their own unique abilities. Brick is able to enter a rage state for added melee damage, Lilith can turn invisible, move very quickly, and emit powerful shock attacks, Mordecai can call upon Bloodwing, his avian pal, to help with a fight, and Roland can make use of an automated turret. Although it's probably the least good of the numbered Borderlands games, the OG Borderlands is still a competent title. Critics very much enjoyed the loot-driven first-person shooter approach to gameplay, the RPG mechanics, the support of up to 4 players, and of course the visuals, which are, once again, not cel-shaded. Borderlands was compared favourably to Diablo, which is good since the devs were going for a sort of first-person Diablo-type experience. It also went on to inspire subsequent looter shooters like Destiny and The Division, so you're welcome for that trend. The story didn't get the best reception in the world, and some of the AI was considered a little wonky, but on the whole, Borderlands was appraised as a very good first stab at something a little bit different. Number 3. Borderlands 3, 2019. PS4, PS5, PC, Xbox One, Xbox Series, and Switch. You have to feel a bit sorry for Borderlands 3. After all, being the follow-up to the critically acclaimed Borderlands 2, which we'll get to shortly, it had some very, very big shoes to fill. Were those toes nice and snug though, or were those shoes left feeling a little bit roomy? Well, like your year 6 feet in a pair of shoe-zone plimsolls, the shoes of Borderlands 2 weren't exactly form-fitting for Borderlands 3, but they did the job. I'll stop with the shoe analogy now. The game opens with a group of vault hunters answering a recruitment call from the Crimson Raiders. Once they arrive on Pandora, they're ordered by Lilith to recover a lost vault map which has been stolen by a violent cult known as the Children of the Vault, led by twins Tyreen and Troy Calypso. It transpires that the pair plan to open multiple vaults and absorb the powers of the monsters within, including one known as the Destroyer, which has the power to end the universe. Not ideal. 4 new playable characters are introduced in Borderlands 3. The Siren Amara, who's able to summon ethereal fists to ethereally fist people. Stop giggling. Mose, a gunner with an iron bear companion. Zane, the operative, who has access to a whole bunch of gadgets. And Flak, a Beastmaster robot with the ability to summon creatures to aid them in combat. The classic Borderlands formula remains intact here. Players take on a load of missions, gun down scores of wrong-uns, hoard loot to their heart's content, and then augment their character in a variety of different ways thanks to the game's RPG mechanics. Speaking of loot, the procedural generation system also makes a return, meaning there are more guns than you could shake a Vault Hunter at. Can you shake a Vault Hunter? Borderlands 3 generally did very well with critics, earning scores in the high 70s to the low 90s depending on the platform. Reviewers were pleased that the game had preserved what made the series great so far, i.e. the huge variety of weapons, entertaining cast of characters, and silly humour. They were also happy that several previously established character arcs were neatly wrapped up, and commended improvements made to the skill system and general gameplay mechanics, as shooters had come a long way since Borderlands 2's release 7 years prior. A couple of things let the game down though, namely its over-reliance on boss fights and the abundance of bullet sponge enemies, which many players found to be tedious, plus the fact that the Calypso twins just didn't have the same impact as Big Bad Handsome Jack did in Borderlands 2. Yes, they had big ambitions and they were definitely evil, but they lacked their predecessor's charismatic charm, and ultimately, the game was worse for it. Still, Borderlands 3's positives far outweigh its negatives, and players are left with a generally fulfilling experience that more than scratches that Pandora itch. Just stick an elastic band around your controller's trigger every time you have a boss encounter and go and get some of your laundry done, or something. Number 2. Tales from the Borderlands, 2014 to 2015. PS3, PS4, PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, Switch, and mobile. We're taking a break from looting and shooting for a moment as we turn our attention to Tales from the Borderlands, a game which eschews the series' usual mechanics in favour of a more narrative-focused experience. Unlike new Tales from the Borderlands, however, this one is actually pretty gosh darned good. Sorry, pardon my language. Released episodically between November 2014 and October 2015, Tales from the Borderlands puts players in control of Reese, a Hyperion employee who dreams of promotion, and Fiona, a con artist working on Pandora alongside her sister, Sasha. Set after the events of Borderlands 2, it's been revealed there are numerous vaults located all over the galaxy, which has drawn legions of vault hunters to the planet Pandora. The episodic story told in Tales from the Borderlands explores how Reese and Fiona are brought together and follows their subsequent adventures in trying to find and open a vault. In addition to several new characters, multiple fan favourites make appearances throughout Tales from the Borderlands, including Claptrap, Moxie, Scooter, and even Handsome Jack, who shows up in the form of an artificial intelligence that's injected into Reese's mind. As an added bonus, they are all voiced by their original voice actors, who, alongside the likes of Troy Baker, Laura Bailey, and Patrick Warburton, put in outstanding performances. Like many of Telltale's other offerings, Tales from the Borderlands is a point-and-click adventure. Players are able to explore the numerous environments and interact with objects, and when playing with Reese, they can even scan items that they find. There are simple puzzles to solve, dialogue options to choose from, and naturally, loot to be gathered. Though in this Borderlands outing, players can only collect money, which can, at certain points in the game, be exchanged exchanged for goods and services. Mostly just goods, though. Upon its release, Tales from the Borderlands garnered an overwhelmingly positive response from critics and players alike. Though some episodes managed to earn higher review scores than others, with Episode 5, The Vault of the Traveler, doing the best when it came down to the numbers, the whole package was bestowed with much praise and many compliments. The writing received particular commendation, with critics falling over themselves to extol the story, characters, and humour of the game. Reviewers were also pleased with how Telltale managed to stay faithful to the source material while transforming it into a totally new gameplay experience, and applauded the action sequences and choice-driven design. In fact, there were very few things not to like about Tales from the Borderlands, and just about the only complaint that anyone had was the fact they experienced the occasional graphical glitch. And if that's the only gripe, then the game really didn't do so bad, did it? There was one, though, that did even better. Number 1. Borderlands 2, 2012. PS3, PS4, PS Vita, PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, Switch, and mobile. I'm gonna lift the curtain slightly here. When we're working on these lists, our writers will go out into the wild, find all of the games that fit the brief, rank them in order before writing out comprehensive entries, and then we'll all sort of huddle up and make sure that everyone generally agrees with the placements. These initial rankings usually come with notes explaining the reasoning, often just a sentence or two saying something like decent gameplay and story but full of bugs, or outstanding writing and world building but combat entirely broken. Our writer's explanation for placing Borderlands 2 in the top spot of today's list, though, said nothing more than perfect game, no notes. And well, she's not really wrong, is she?
Borderlands 2 is practically a how-to manual on crafting a sequel, improving upon everything its predecessor missed the mark on and taking everything that it did well and making it bigger, better, and more rambunctious. The sequel takes place 5 years after the events of the first game, by which point a chap named Handsome Jack has managed to secure a whole load of the valuable resource Iridium and has made use of it to bring peace to Pandora, all whilst seating himself as the planet's ruler.
Borderlands 2 opens with Handsome Jack betraying our Vault Hunter protagonists, who are rescued from the wasteland by helpful but annoying robot Claptrap, and later recruited by the Crimson Raiders, an anti-Hyperion resistance movement who aim to bring down Handsome Jack before he can unleash a powerful Iridium monster known as the Warrior. Like the first game, Borderlands 2 is a first-person shooter with role-playing elements. Players pick from 4 different classes, each of which is tied to a character. Axton the Commando is able to summon a turret to provide combat support, Maya the Siren can phase-lock enemies, trapping them in an energy sphere for a short period of time, Salvador the Gunzerker can temporarily dual-wield weapons, and Zero the Assassin has the ability to turn invisible and gets a sweet hologram decoy to distract his foes.
The procedurally generated loot system makes a triumphant return, with Gearbox Software's Randy Pitchford estimating that there are more guns available in Borderlands 2 than in any other PS3 and Xbox 360 shooter combined. That's a lot of flipping guns right there. So why is Borderlands 2 our, and most other people's, favourite Borderlands game? Well, both fans and critics alike felt it was exceptionally well written, filled with bombastic characters including perhaps the greatest video game villain of all time, and was downright hilarious to boot.
Furthermore, the game was praised for its gunplay, which was incredibly tight, the world, which was vibrant and felt lived in, especially when compared to the Pandora of the original Borderlands, and of course the procedurally generated loot system, which would have kept even the most unashamed of loot goblins satisfied. Furthermore though, Borderlands 2 was also lauded for its DLC, with Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, in which Tiny Tina runs a game of bunkers and badasses whilst trying to come to terms with another character's death, being one of the finest additions to any game ever.
Bright, colourful, action-packed, hysterically funny, and genuinely heartwarming in places, there was never any question in our minds that Borderlands 2 would top our list today. Right, well, if you'll excuse me, I've got over 17 million guns I need to catalogue. Does anyone know where I can find a cheap storage unit? Or several million cheap storage units. Thank you.